My name is Kennedy Dawson, and I'm 25 years old. And the day my father looked me in the eyes and told me, "Your only job is marriage," something inside me didn't just break. It went completely silent. Not the kind of silence that heals, but the kind that remembers every word, every glance, every moment you were made to feel small. I stood there in the living room, sunlight falling across the polished floor, while he sat comfortably with his coffee like he had just stated a simple fact of life. My mother didn't argue. She didn't even look at me. She just adjusted the flowers on the table, like this was normal, like I was the one who didn't understand how the world worked. And in that moment, I realized, in my own home, I was never meant to become anything more than someone's wife. Growing up, the difference between me and my brother Ethan wasn't subtle, it was carved into every corner of our lives. Ethan got the best schools, the newest laptop every year, private tutors when his grades slipped even a little. I got hand-me-down books and lectures about knowing my place. When he got into a top college, my father threw a party, invited relatives, bragged like he had personally built Ethan's future with his bare hands. When I graduated top of my class, my mother smiled softly and said, "That's nice, dear. It will help you find a good husband." No celebration, no pride, just a reminder of the role they had already written for me. And I played it for years because I didn't know I had a choice. But the day everything changed was the day I asked for something that should have been simple. I had been accepted into a prestigious business program, my dream. Something I had worked for in silence while everyone was busy watching Ethan shine. I walked into my father's study, heart pounding, holding the acceptance letter like it was my future in paper form. He barely looked at it, just glanced once, then leaned back in his chair with a small, dismissive smile. "Why waste money on this?" he said calmly. "We're already paying for Ethan's college. You don't need all this. You'll get married. That's your future." His words didn't hit me immediately. They sank slowly, like poison spreading through my veins. I tried to argue, my voice shaking, but still holding on to hope. I told him I could earn a scholarship, that I would work part-time, that I wasn't asking for luxury, just a chance. He didn't even let me finish. His expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw something colder than indifference. "Enough," he said sharply. "Don't be ungrateful. Everything we do is for this family, and your role in this family is not to compete with your brother." Compete. That word stayed with me because I had never seen it as a competition until he made it one. And in that moment, I understood I was never losing by accident. I was being held back on purpose. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the acceptance letter under the dim light of my desk lamp. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from something building deep inside me. Years of silence, years of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed like I didn't matter. I could hear laughter downstairs, Ethan and my parents, celebrating something I wasn't even part of. And suddenly, it all became clear. I wasn't just unwanted in their plans. I was inconvenient, a reminder of something they didn't value. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question that changed everything. What if I stopped asking for permission? I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and wiped the tears from my face. Not because I was okay, but because I was done letting them see me break. That night, something shifted inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself. It prepares. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't beg again. I just sat there in silence, making a decision no one in that house would ever see coming. If they believed my only future was marriage, then they had no idea who I was becoming behind their backs. And for the first time, I smiled. The next morning, nothing looked different, but everything felt different. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and sat at the same table where my future had been casually dismissed the night before. My father was reading the newspaper, Ethan scrolling through his phone, My mother placing breakfast in front of them like a quiet routine she had perfected over years. No one mentioned what happened. No one asked how I felt. It was as if my dreams had been erased overnight. And that's when I realized something powerful. If they could pretend my future didn't exist, then I could build one they'd never see coming. So I stayed quiet, not weak quiet, strategic quiet. That same day, I started making calls I had never imagined I'd have to make alone. I reached out to the admissions office, explained my situation without sounding like a victim, and asked about financial aid, grants, anything. The woman on the other end didn't pity me. She listened, really listened. For the first time, someone spoke to me like I mattered. She told me about a partial scholarship I qualified for and suggested I apply immediately. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was a door, a small one, but open, and that was all I needed because I had spent my entire life waiting for permission to walk through doors. Now, I was ready to break them if I had to. Weeks passed, and I lived a double life inside the house. To them, I was still the same obedient daughter helping my mother, staying out of arguments, never challenging my father again. But behind closed doors, I was building something piece by piece. I took freelance work online, late at night when everyone was asleep. I sold all jewelry I had been given over the years, gifts meant to prepare me for a marriage I no longer wanted. Every dollar I earned, I saved. Every rejection I received, I turned into fuel. And slowly, quietly, I started to feel something I had never truly felt before. Control. Meanwhile, Ethan's life continued exactly as expected. Expensive dinners, new gadgets, endless support. My father spoke about his future like it was guaranteed success, like nothing could ever go wrong. I watched it all from a distance, not with jealousy, but with clarity, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be him. I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I was building something they couldn't touch, something that didn't depend on their validation. And the more I worked in silence, the more I realized they had underestimated the one person who had nothing left to lose. Then came the letter that changed everything. I remember holding it in my hands, my heart racing as I opened it slowly, afraid to hope too much. But when I read the words, I couldn't breathe for a second. I had been awarded a full scholarship, not partial, full, tuition, accommodation, everything. For a moment, the room felt too small to hold what I was feeling. Years of being told I wasn't worth investing in, erased in a single sentence. But instead of running downstairs to show them, to finally prove something I didn't move, because this wasn't for them, this was mine. That night, I packed my bags quietly, not dramatically, not with anger, but with purpose. I left a short note on my desk. Nothing emotional, nothing desperate, just facts. I got the scholarship. I'm leaving tomorrow. No explanations. No begging for approval. For once, I wasn't asking them to understand me. I was informing them. And as I zipped my suitcase, I felt something unfamiliar, but powerful rising inside me. Not revenge, not yet, but the beginning of it. Because walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the first move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. As I stepped out of that house the next morning, the same house that had defined my limits for 25 years, I didn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, but because I knew one day they would be the ones looking at me, trying to understand how everything slipped out of their control. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to say a word. My success would speak for me, and it would be louder than every dismissal, every insult, every "you're not enough" they had ever thrown at me. Because this time, I was done being invisible. The first few months after I left were not glamorous. There were no dramatic victories. No instant transformation into the person I dreamed of becoming. There was just exhaustion, long nights, and a constant, quiet fear that maybe my father had been right all along. I studied during the day, worked late into the night, and survived on instant noodles and determination. My classmates talked about vacations and family support, Well, I calculated every expense down to the last dollar. But even in the hardest moments, there was something different about my struggle. It was mine. Every step forward, no matter how small, belonged to me and no one could take that away. I remember one particular night, sitting alone in the library, staring at a screen that refused to make sense. My head ached, my eyes burned, and for a brief moment, I felt that old voice creeping back in "You're not enough." It sounded like my father, calm and certain. I almost gave into it, almost closed my laptop and walked away. But then I remembered the look on his face when he dismissed my dreams, the way my mother stayed silent, the way my brother never even noticed, and something inside me hardened. I leaned forward, wiped my tears, and whispered to myself, "Not this time." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was a promise I had never broken since. As time passed, things slowly began to change. Professors started noticing my work, not because I asked for attention, but because I refused to quit when things got difficult. One of them, Professor Langston, called me after class one day and asked a simple question: "Who taught you to fight like this?" I didn't know how to answer, because the truth was, no one had taught me. I had learned it by surviving in a place where giving up would have been easier. He offered me an internship opportunity at a small but fast-growing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. And for me, it was more than enough. That internship became my turning point. While others treated it like a stepping stone, I treated it like it was the only chance I would ever get. I stayed late, took on extra work, learned things no one asked me to learn. I listened more than I spoke. I watched how decisions were made, how deals were structured, how power moved in silence. And slowly, I started to understand something my father never did. Success isn't given to the loudest person in the room. It's built by the one who refuses to stop when no one is watching. By the end of the internship, I wasn't just another student, I was someone they couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, back home, life continued without me, or at least that's what I thought. My mother called occasionally, her voice careful, distant, as if she didn't quite know how to speak to me anymore. She never apologized. She never acknowledged what had happened. She just asked if I was doing okay, like I had simply moved out for convenience. My father never called, not once, and Ethan, he sent a few casual messages at first, mostly about his own life, his achievements, his plans. Then even those stopped. It was as if I had been quietly erased from their world, just like they had tried to erase my future. But the truth they didn't see was this: I was no longer the same person they had dismissed. The girl who once waited for approval had disappeared somewhere between sleepless nights and silent determination. In her place was someone sharper, stronger, more aware of how the world really worked. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was building leverage. I was learning how to position myself in rooms where decisions were made, where influence mattered, where respect wasn't given, it was earned and enforced. And for the first time, I started to think beyond survival. I started to think about what would happen when our worlds collided again. Because deep down, I knew they would. People like my father don't forget control easily. And people like me, we don't forget what it felt like to be underestimated. I didn't need to rush anything. I didn't need to prove myself too early. I just needed to keep building, keep learning, keep growing until the moment was right, until the balance shifted, until the same people who once told me I was nothing had no choice but to face what I had become. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be emotional, it would be precise, calculated, final. 3 years passed before the moment finally arrived, and it didn't come with a warning. It came disguised as opportunity. I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, reviewing a potential acquisition deal for the firm I now worked with full-time. Numbers, projections, risk assessments. Everything felt routine until I saw the company name. My fingers froze over the file. It was my father's business, the same company he had proudly built, the same one he claimed would one day belong to Ethan. Except now, it wasn't thriving, it was drowning. Poor decisions, overconfidence, mismanaged investments. The empire he once used to measure my worth was quietly collapsing, and I was sitting on the other side of the table. I didn't react immediately. I didn't say a word. I just listened as my team discussed strategies, buy options, restructuring plans, control percentages. To them, it was just another struggling company. To me, it was something much deeper. It was history, pain, rejection, all wrapped into a single file. When my manager asked if anyone wanted to lead the negotiation, I spoke before I could overthink it. "I'll handle it," I said calmly. No hesitation, no emotion in my voice. But inside, everything was aligning, not by luck, not by coincidence, by years of silent preparation leading to this exact moment. The day of the meeting, I walked into that office building like a stranger, not as a daughter returning home, but as a professional with power. The receptionist didn't recognize me. The walls looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had just grown beyond them. When the conference room door opened, I saw them, my father, my mother, and Ethan sitting on the other side of the table. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. My father's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. My mother's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say my name, but didn't know if she had the right anymore. And Ethan, he just stared, like he was finally seeing me for the first time. I took my seat slowly, placing the file in front of me with steady hands. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm, controlled, unshaken. No anger, no bitterness, just presence, the kind they had never allowed me to have before. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Kennedy, what is this?" he asked, his voice tighter than I had ever heard it. I met his eyes, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as someone who no longer needed it. "This is the meeting where we discuss the future of your company," I replied. Simple, direct, final. The tension in that room was suffocating. My father tried to shift the conversation, to reassert his authority, but the power had already moved and he felt it. Every question he asked, I answered with clarity. Every objection he raised, I dismantled with facts. Ethan tried to contribute, but he wasn't prepared. Not for this level, not for me. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one being supported. He was the one falling behind. My mother stayed silent, her eyes moving between us, as if she was witnessing something she never thought possible. Not just my success, but my transformation. Then came the moment that changed everything. I laid out the terms of the deal. Our firm would take controlling interest in the company. We would stabilize it, restructure it, save it from collapse, but control would no longer belong to them. My father's face hardened as he listened. "You expect me to hand over everything I built," he said, his voice laced with disbelief and anger. I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "No," I replied quietly. "I expect you to decide whether you want to keep your pride or your company." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Silence followed, heavy, unavoidable, the kind of silence that forces truth to surface. My father looked at the papers again, then at me. Really looked this time, not as his daughter, not as someone beneath him, but as the person holding the future he once denied me. And in that moment, I saw it, the shift, the realization, the understanding that the girl he once dismissed as only meant for marriage was now the one deciding his fate, not through anger, not through revenge, but through power he never believed I could have. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't about humiliation. This was about balance, about consequences, about showing them what happens when you underestimate someone for too long. And as the pen slowly moved in my father's hand, signing away control to the very future he tried to deny, I felt something settle inside me. Not satisfaction, not victory, something deeper, closure. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment they finally understood it. The moment the pen left the paper, Something irreversible settled into the room. My father didn't slam the table or raise his voice like he used to. He just sat there, staring at the signature as if it didn't belong to him, as if the control he had held onto his entire life had slipped through his fingers in silence. My mother's eyes were filled with something I had never seen before, not disappointment, not indifference, but regret. And Ethan, he leaned back in his chair, stunned, like the world he had always been promised had quietly rewritten itself without his permission. No one argued, no one protested, because deep down, they all knew this wasn't sudden. This was years in the making. I gathered the documents slowly, professionally, as if this were just another meeting on my schedule. But inside, memories were rising like echoes. The late nights, the rejection, the moment I was told I didn't matter. I looked at my father one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. This didn't have to happen like this, I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. It didn't break. You could have supported both your children. You chose not to. He didn't respond. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say, no authority to hide behind, no certainty left to lean on, just silence. The same silence he once gave me. As I stood up to leave, my mother finally spoke, her voice soft, almost fragile. Kennedy, we didn't know you would. She paused, searching for the right words, but they never came. Because how do you explain years of overlooking someone? How do you justify choosing one child over another? I didn't let her finish. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need the explanation anymore. That's the point, I said gently. You never tried to know. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. And sometimes, facts hurt more than anger ever could. Ethan followed me outside, his steps quicker, uncertain. Wait, he called out, his voice lacking the confidence it once had. I stopped but didn't turn immediately. For years, I had stood behind him, watching him move forward while I stayed invisible. Now the roles had shifted. When I finally faced him, there was no resentment in me, just distance. I didn't know things were like that for you, he said, almost defensively. I held his gaze, steady but calm. You didn't know, because you never had to look, I replied. And that was the truth. Privilege doesn't question itself. It just exists. Until it doesn't. Walking out of that building, I didn't feel like I had won something. There was no dramatic rush, no overwhelming triumph. What I felt was something quieter, more powerful, freedom, not from them, but from the version of myself that once needed their approval. The girl who waited for validation was gone. In her place stood someone who had built her own worth, piece by piece, without shortcuts, without favors. And that kind of strength doesn't need recognition. It doesn't ask for applause. It simply exists, unshakable. In the weeks that followed, I made decisions for the company that were fair, not personal. I didn't destroy what my father had built. I stabilized it, improved it, gave it a future it didn't have before, because this was never about revenge in the way people expect. It wasn't about making them suffer. It was about making them understand actions, consequences, reality. My father stepped down quietly. Ethan had to start from a position he had never experienced before earning his place instead of inheriting it. And my mother, she called more often now, not out of obligation, but something closer to reflection. And me, I kept moving forward, not to prove them wrong anymore, but because I finally knew what I was capable of. I didn't carry the past like a wound. I carried it like a lesson, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be without losing yourself in the process. It's standing in front of the same people who once doubted you, not to humiliate them, but to show them what they failed to see. So if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: never let someone else decide the limits of your life. Not your family, not your circumstances, not the roles they try to force you into. Because the moment you stop asking for permission, you start becoming unstoppable. And karma, it doesn't always come with knives or chaos. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of the person you chose to become.